Oh, Phil, you didn't really think you were getting off that easy after our little exchange on Little Kropotkin's video. No, that's not going to happen here, and it's not going to happen anytime when you're dealing with me. I warned you not to make idle threats. You chose to ignore me, so now I'm going to smack you silly. I hope you understand this, and you understand why I'm doing this, because I don't like you. I think you're an unscrupulous, unethical cur who has made a living now at this point being a professional victim. Yes, you are a professional victim, Phil, and we will demonstrate why that is here in a second. Now, you, like the idiot that you are, showed up on Little Kropotkin's video and accused her of not listening to you when she was listening just fine to you. It's that you are such an idiot that you should have chosen your words a lot more carefully. Now, then I point out the historical and logical inconsistencies in your argument concerning Stalin in a fairly long comment. You chose to ignore that and concentrate on the fact that in my last video to you, where I was more than a little pissed off, you thought I made a threat to you. And I then told you that, Phil, if you really thought I threatened you, you should go to the police instead of sitting on her video complaining about it and claiming to be a victim of the same threats that you claim we should disregard with Anita Sarkeesian because she is being a professional victim. Well done, Phil. You have now won the Hypocrite of the Year award, and it's not even the ceremony time. Coughlin already did that a little bit earlier in the year, so you already got this one wrapped up. Brilliant, Phil. Way to prove exactly what everybody's been saying about you to be true. Now, let's clear a few things up. First of all, Phil, I am not a fan of Anita Sarkeesian. In fact, I find this entire episode surrounding the situation to be tiresome, ridiculous, and incredibly stupid. I do not, however, disregard the threats that have been made against her or other women that are working in gaming community at this point because they don't have the luxury of ignoring them. It only takes one psychopath to do major damage vis-a-vis Elliot Rogers, Dylan Klebold, the people that perpetrated that massacre at Charlie Hebdo. All you have to do is have a few crazy people decide to do something, and it can cost people their lives. Ironically, you then go on to cite freedom of speech and do things that you don't understand in the least, which Bewildered Ape called you out on earlier in this week, which I will link in the low bar also. So they don't have the luxury of ignoring those threats. Now, as for actual reasoned arguments against something that Anita Sarkeesian has said, there have been very few to none. And that is because none of you actually understand what's going on, especially you, Phil. You don't know anything about how cultural critique or artistic critique is actually done, and you've revealed that over and over again. But to say that I'm a fan of Anita Sarkeesian would be one of the biggest stretches that you could possibly come to. Link in the low bar to a video I did criticizing her and her treatment of video games in what I believe to be a rather sometimes inconsistent, sometimes very sloppy, sometimes very unnuanced way. That doesn't diminish things that are said in the video that make sense or that actually have a point. People could very easily have taken this task on, but they chose not to. They made this about women in video games and how certain groups of people, a small minority of people, actually maybe even only a few thousand, don't want that to be the case because they want their games to stay the same, cater to them, and basically treat them like the giant man-children that they are vis-a-vis you, man-child. So let's get that out of the way right now. Besides, we all know that your penchant for strawmanning and committing logical fallacies aside, you're only doing this in an attempt to dismiss anything that I might have said on that video as being valid, just like you tried to make a argument from false authority when you wanted to see any kind of peer-reviewed information that I'd put out, when I have never made any beefs about the fact that I am still a student, but you never actually argued the historical information I put forward. You just decided to go down the logical fallacy route. Then you say that someone is threatening you, which, according to you, shouldn't be a problem because you can dismiss such threats as being invalid. Instead, you decide to put on your professional victim hat and act like you've been threatened. As I will say again, Phil, you should report it if you really think I threatened you. Now, when I said that I was going to fuck you over one way or the other in that video, that still stands. If I ever get a chance to intervene at an academic in an academic capacity or an academic institution or a private institution that might be thinking about hiring you, I catch wind of it, I'm going to direct them to the shitty and terrible things you've done and said, including things you know about already. By the way, Phil, what do you think is going to happen if people start looking into what happened to you at Cornell? All we know at this point is that you were dismissed under, shall we say, mysterious circumstances. And that's when you started to go on your little MRA kick and starting to go after women for whatever reason. Could that have had something to do with it, Phil? Now, I could be a real asshole like you and imply all kinds of things from this, just like you jackoffs do with Anita Sarkeesian, and say, well, look, Phil must obviously be hiding something because he was fired for a reason, and we know that he doesn't like women, so therefore he must have raped someone. Completely untrue statement, no evidence to back it up. I could make it, but it wouldn't matter. Would it? Because once it's out there, people would run with it. You do this kind of shit all the time. It's not the kind of thing that a scientist or an academic should be doing under any circumstance. That's why, if I ever get a chance to fuck you over like that, I will. And believe me, Phil, I hold a grudge for a long time. Do not expect me anytime soon to let this go. For reasons of my own making and reasons that of your own making, you have created this enemy that you're seeing before you right now. So don't think that I'm going to forget about you anytime soon, because that's not going to be the case, Phil. As I said, help my friends, hurt my enemies. And you, sir, are basically no friend. So don't make idle threats if you can't back them up. And certainly don't try to make yourself into the victim in this situation when in fact you've been the victimizer pretty much the entire time you've been on the internet. That's what you do, Phil. You're inconsistent, you're unethical, you're a giant cur. You're a bad scientist, too. That's why you're a ping monkey doing other people's experiments instead of running your own lab or teaching. How old are you now, Phil? 50? Somewhere closing in on 50? You still don't have any kind of a tenure position? You're wandering the globe looking for truth and fun? No, there's a reason for that. It's because you don't fit in that capacity. No academic institution will take you because no academic institution wants to deal with you. You had a position at Cornell, and you got fired for reasons that we don't know. But I suspect if it's anything like your attitude for most of the things that you do, that's probably it. You put me in the mind of someone who is a narcissist who demands adoration and being considered to be the smartest guy in the room. The problem with that, Phil, though, is in order for you to be the smartest guy in the room, we've got to fill the room with a lot of dim bulbs, like Dawkins and Harris and the other group of ninny hammers that you seem to be a part of and represent. So you're never going to be that guy either, Phil. Now, with that pretty much set aside, let me be clear on something else here. When I told you to deal with the historical information that I put forward, you should have just fucking done it, instead of avoid the question and try to turn this around to something it wasn't. But the reason you and your lackeys that showed up to try and defend you couldn't do that is because you didn't know anything about the subject matter and you had no idea what you were talking about. The whole point of Kropotkin's video was to direct this in a situation towards considerations of ethics in certain activities vis-a-vis human warfare, which on a hangout that I recently did, I more or less came to the conclusion that once you crossed into the realm of killing people, ethics are going to be something that are hard to adhere to. Your argument to Ray Comfort was bizarre on many levels, especially when you talked about the Haber process, which existed long before the Second World War. I don't know if you were implying that that process came out of the Second World War, or that if the process had come out of something that had happened in the concentration camps, that it would be worth the price paid in the deaths that occurred at those camps for the sake of achieving this technology. Now, your choice of processes in this situation I found rather dubious. Why would you be considering the Haber method in something like that? Was it simply because it's an example of where you see science as feeding people and therefore doing something good? Or were you trying to imply something else? I think that's probably all the farther your thought processes went. You said, oh, look, the Haber method, that's scientific. That feeds 1 in 3 people in the world. Mazel tov. I've got Ray where I want him. But you didn't have Ray where you want him. Ray had you dead to rights in that entire conversation. You screwed up, Phil. One, you should never get into live debates, which is probably why you turned down my offer to discuss this in some sort of live hangout. You shouldn't do those because basically you get found out. You don't really know anything, and you certainly can't debate. Just like with Ray Comfort, the people of the Westboro Baptist Church, basically anybody you've ever gone against in a live debate, you have gotten your ass kicked. So that's all the farther I think you took it. Haber process feeds people, science good. But nothing like that came out of the Holocaust. Even the medical knowledge that was gained through the experimentations is dubious at best because they weren't done a lot of the time, or some of the time we should say, under strict scientific scrutiny. And more importantly, then we ask ourselves the ethical question, even if I did have a chance to use this to save lives, should I do it? Some people would probably say, actually, yeah, let's have some good come out of this. Let this horrible thing yield some positive result. Others would say no, because it would encourage the commission of such crimes in the future. For people to act unethically, to act outside of the scope of medical knowledge and outside the scope of the Hippocratic Oath. So that's one of the reasons that people might choose not or to do something like that. But that is a very difficult ethical question to wrestle with. You try to turn everything into an equation. This is not an equation. This is not a chemical process. This has nothing to do with covalent and non-covalent bonds or whatever the hell you want to talk about. Actually, that should be something else, but then, we're talking about something in geology that I learned in geology, but I'm not going to concentrate on that right now. The point of this is that you tried to link this process with being something ethical that if it had come out of the Holocaust would have been good. Here's the problem with that entire situation, though, here also, Phil. You said that the Haber process feeds 1 in 3 people in the world. Now, since I don't have a citation on that, I don't know if that's accurate. But let's look at something else about this process. Feeds 1 in 3 people in the world, and yet there are still millions of people who are either going to bed hungry, are starving to death, or have starved to death. So this Haber process, while feeding certain groups of people in the world, has completely left others out of the loop. The process itself has nothing to do with the ethics of how it's employed. The ethics of how it is employed demand and or demonstrate whether or not the process has been used for good or ill. The same way that Einstein's theory of relativity, the parts of it that are derived from that theory of relativity were used to create the atom bomb. Einstein didn't envision a bomb. Einstein envisioned cheap fuel for everybody. That was what he was thinking when he thought about atomic fission and fusion and that kind of thing. Now, I'm not going to get too far into that because I'm not a physicist. The same way I'm not a chemist, nor am I a medical doctor, or anything of that nature. I know my limitations in my knowledge, and when I reach them, I stop, because I don't want to risk making a mistake, or telling somebody something that's not accurate. Or if I do, I correct it later on when I discover that the information is inaccurate. In other words, I take responsibility for what I'm doing, Phil. You, on the other hand, don't. You routinely say things that are misleading, downright wrong, or based on pseudoscience vis-a-vis body language, vis-a-vis sexual dimorphism, vis-a-vis your inability to understand what testosterone does. All of that was wrong. You made no correction. You made no attempt to rectify your mistakes, Phil. That is why you're a crappy scientist, because to you, there's only one possible way, and that is I am correct. And as long as I'm correct, that's all that matters. And when I'm not correct, I'm still correct. So your argument that somehow science, gained by some sort of misdemeanory, still potentially has value depends on what value judgments you're making. Some people would say it's not even worth the cost. 11 to 15 million people were killed in the Holocaust. Very little good came out of it. And very little has been done since to stop it from happening again. 10 million people in the Congo, what happened in Serbia, you name it, it's been happening. Cambodia, Khmer Rouge, Ferdinand Imelda Marcos, Nicolae Ceausescu, the civil war that was the result in, I believe, was in Mozambique between the fascist Portuguese government and the native fighters there. The Algerian Civil War, well, the War of Independence against the French, of course, the French, the war against the Vietnamese. All this has happened. Atrocity has been committed, despite the fact that World War II, after World War II, we all said never again, and it just keeps happening again. Syria, now. Iraq, now. Doesn't seem like we're making much progress. Why do you think that is, Phil? I'll tell you why we're not making much progress. Because we still have people like you, and among other inconsistent pseudoscientific, pseudo-intellectual quacks, who continue to advocate impossible positions that don't make any sense. Like your anti-Islamic sentiment, when, as Klingshore has shown over and over again, when Muslim extremists act, they often do it as a result of U.S. foreign policy and things that have inspired them from that particular bent. I know he's working on something to this end right now, so I'm not going to go too far into it because I want him to be able to explain it. There's a nuance to understanding something like this, understanding your enemy. You have to listen to your enemy and know what the enemy is doing in order to understand what they're doing. You don't do that by Draw Muhammad Day. You don't do that by insulting Muslims who are actually middle of the road and not harming anybody, or against the kind of things that happened in France, or against genocides, against anti-Semitism. And you and others like you just keep screwing things up. That's why we continue to have the problems we do. You never learn your lessons. You just keep on pressing ahead despite the fact you've been wrong over and over and over again, Phil. That's what you do. That's your nom de plume. No matter what happens, Phil is always right. And your subscribers seem to think that also. None of them criticize you for the crap that you do. None of them call you out for the inconsistencies that you create, or the bad science and sometimes pseudoscience that you put out on your channel, which according to people in the atheist community is supposed to be the antithesis of what we're doing. And since you and others like you, Jacqueline Glenn, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Bill Maher, seem to have become the face of that idea, which is in fact nothing more than a lack of belief in any kind of a God. Those of us who don't like or go along with those ideas are being classified in the same group as you jackasses, and we don't like that. This doesn't mean that you can't make reasoned critique of religion. This doesn't mean that you can't criticize something like Islam. You can do it, and it's actually quite readily something that lends itself to be criticized. One of the fascinating things that all of you have seemed to have lost track of in this entire situation is that you should be listening to people who are ex-Muslims, who know a thing or two about the religion, because often you simply disregard what they're saying. You just sort of ignore them. So yeah, you should talk to them. That doesn't mean that if they're somebody like, what's her name, the one who got kicked out of Holland, I can't remember her name now, R.A. Harasi or something like that, but if they are just as big as lunatics and fanatics in the other direction as the people they claim to despise, you don't listen to them. But there are plenty of other people out there you should listen to, instead of ignoring them or doing things to undermine them, or breaking into servers to try and undermine them so that you can get back at them for supposed slight against you. You know, that kind of thing. And remember, Phil, this kind of thing cuts both ways. Like I said, if you really think I made a threat against you, by all means report it to the police, but we both know that that's not the case. And you're just sitting there trying to call the bluff at this point or something like that. No, you're making an idle threat. And like I said, don't make idle threats. I told you not to do that. If you're going to do it, do it. Don't sit there and pussyfoot around with it. Do it expeditiously. Stop being a coward. I know that's difficult for you because I'm not a woman, so you can't really attack me in the same fashion you normally would. Because to you, the weaker sex is the weaker sex for a reason. They're not, of course. They're fully capable of doing everything that we can, including deal with a cur like you. You just assume that they can't. So don't make idle threats and stop playing the professional victim, which is what you're doing now. Hopefully this will go up before your so-called video comes out so that everybody will have a little bit of counterbalance to what's going on here. By the way, Phil, my offer still stands. If you want to discuss this in some sort of a public chat or live hangout, I'm more than willing to do that. The question is, do you have the testicular fortitude to rise to that challenge, or are you going to shrink away and run off like you did last time in the comments section of Kropotkin's video? You couldn't even address her criticisms of you. You just created a straw man and left it at that. I find it hilarious that little Kropotkin can reduce you to a blithering, blubbering pile of stupid simply by pointing out the inconsistencies in what you say and what you do. She does make you look foolish, very much foolish in that video. Among other times, she's made you look foolish and called you out for your stupidity. And other people have done so too. People like Sequester Zone, Pragmatic Uselessness. There are many people who have pointed to the ridiculousness that is Thunderfoot and showed it for the hypocrisy that it really is. It doesn't change the fact she still kicked your ass, Phil. It doesn't change the fact that she defeated you simply by making you look, well, not just making you look foolish, but pointing out why you're a fool. Your inconsistencies, your inability to understand logic and reason, or your inability to understand philosophy or nuance, your constant attempts to play the victim, your constant attempts to make idle threats, and then when somebody says, you know what, Phil, one of these days this is going to fuck you over, and I'm going to be there standing there laughing when it happens, when something that you say or do comes back to bite you in the ass. When somebody says that, oh, that's a threat against you. Oh, how terrible, Phil. I would never want anybody to feel threatened on the internet as opposed to you. So, by all means, if you really think I have done something to threaten you, please contact the authorities. And when that happens, I will more than gladly tell the authorities about some of the fun things that you've done. You know, some of the illegal shit that you've done, especially in the Czech Republic. So remember, that cuts both ways, as Bewildered Ape has pointed out in his wonderfully satirical video towards you. So don't bring a knife to a gunfight, Phil, because if you do, this is what happens. So fuck you, shut up, grow some stones, and bother to confront the people that have been talking to you, instead of acting like a little child, throwing a tantrum and running off when they best you intellectually, as you were bested intellectually in the comment section of that video by myself and Little Kropotkin and everybody else who came to argue with you, Skeptical Heretic, Ryan Wiley, all these people that you don't seem to understand, or rather acknowledge when they actually say something to you, and you never deal with their arguments. You do nothing to actually rectify the situation. You just continue to act like a complete and total jackass. So once again, don't make idle threats, Phil, because nobody here is scared. And once again, remember that we've got the hand grenade, you've got the knife. Just mentioning that so that you understand that if there's going to be mutually assured destruction, you will not escape this. Got it? Thank you. Good night, everybody.